I stood in the middle of the living room, which was covered with a $500,000 Persian rug, looking straight into the eyes of my daughter-in-law, Savannah Pierce, who was crying as if I had just slapped her in front of 30 guests. "Denise, I think you need to apologize to Savannah." Malcolm's voice, my son, was so cold that I flinched slightly. This was no longer the child I used to stay up all night caring for when he had a high fever. This was a complete stranger standing by his wife, looking at his mother as if I were a party crasher at this elite gathering in River Oaks. "Apologize?" I smiled faintly. "Apologize for what, son?" "You made Savannah uncomfortable in front of the guests." Malcolm held his wife's hand, his voice trembling with anger. "You know how important that bottle of wine is to her." I looked at the 2015 Bordeaux bottle sitting on the table, the bottle Savannah had been showing off for 20 minutes, talking about a family plantation in France, a private flight to visit the vineyard, and having to wait 3 years to secure this limited allocation. Yet I only said one simple sentence. "Sweetie, I saw this bottle at Specs Wine last week. They were having a sale for $89. Now all eyes were focused on me. Savannah's friends, all women in designer dresses, weighed down by heavy diamonds, were whispering to one another. I caught one phrase. "The mother-in-law from the East End." Malcolm sighed, rubbing his temple with one hand as if I had exhausted him. "You don't understand. This isn't just about the bottle of wine. This is about respect. It's about how you always ruin everything." "Ruin?" I kept my voice calm, though my heart was pounding like a drum. "Is telling the truth also ruining things?" "Apologize to Savannah, Mom," Malcolm said, his voice hard as steel. "Otherwise—" He paused for a beat, looking at me with eyes I had never seen on my son before. "Otherwise, you get out of this house." Right now, the entire room seemed to freeze. I heard the antique clock in the corner tick, someone placing a wine glass down on a table, the sound of my own breathing, slow, heavy, and I knew I had to choose. Bow down and apologize for a single truthful sentence, or lose the only son I had dedicated my entire life to raising. But just then, an image flashed in my mind, an 8-year-old boy hugging me tightly in the small kitchen in the East End, whispering, "Mom, you're the strongest person I know." I had taught my son to be truthful. I had taught him not to bow down to falsehoods. So at this very moment, I could not betray what I myself had taught. I stood up straight, lifted my head, looked at Malcolm, and then at Savannah. "Fine. You want me to apologize? I will apologize, but I will do it my way, and what I said immediately after that changed this family forever." But before I tell you what I said, let me backtrack a little, because to understand why I, Denise Holloway, stood in the middle of the River Oaks mansion like an outsider, you need to know who we used to be. Malcolm did not always live in a house with floor-to-ceiling glass windows or a saltwater pool. He grew up in a 2-bedroom house in the East End, where the sound of the train passing every night became his lullaby. I still remember the nights I stayed awake until 2 a.m., sitting at the old kitchen table, patching his backpack over and over so he wouldn't have to carry a torn bag to school. I worked 2 shifts at Memorial Hermann Hospital, the morning shift, from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. as a nurse, the evening shift from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. in the emergency room. Between the 2 shifts, I would come home to cook dinner for Malcolm, check his homework, and then catch the bus back to the hospital. Once, Malcolm asked, "Mom, why don't you rest like my friend's mom?" I just smiled, stroking his hair. "Because I want you to have a better future than mine, son." But what I didn't say was, every night when I lay down, my legs were so numb that I had to soak them in hot water for 15 minutes just to fall asleep. My wrists ached from lifting patients all day, and sometimes I cried very quietly in the bathroom, just so Malcolm wouldn't hear. because I didn't know how I was going to pay the electricity bill that month. But in front of my son, I always smiled. I always said, "We're okay, son. Having each other is enough." And Malcolm, that sweet little boy, would always hug me and say, "I love you more than anything in the world." The day Malcolm received a full scholarship to Rice University, I cried. But this time they were tears of happiness. All the sleepless nights, the backaches, the meals I skipped so he could eat until full. It was all worth it. "Mom," Malcolm said, his eyes red, "I will take care of you later. I promise. You won't have to struggle anymore." I believed him. I believed every word. But you know, life has detours we never anticipate. And for Malcolm, that detour started with a person. Then everything changed in his final year of college. Malcolm met Savannah Pierce at a fundraising event. Savannah, the daughter of a prestigious law family in River Oaks. Golden hair, a perfect smile, and a world I had never belonged to. The first time Malcolm brought Savannah over, I prepared his special fried chicken, his favorite dish since childhood. I cleaned the house, put fresh flowers on the table, and wore my best, though old, dress. I wanted everything to be presentable. Savannah walked in, looking around with a polite but distant smile. "Oh, what a cozy place." The word cozy in her mouth sounded like a subtle insult. Throughout dinner, Savannah only picked at her food, occasionally checking her phone. Malcolm looked from his fiancée to me, as if silently pleading for the two most important women in his life to try and get along. "You're a great cook, Ms. Denise," Savannah said in a tone that let me know it was merely courtesy. "But Malcolm and I usually eat organic food. I'm trying to keep Malcolm healthy." I bit my lip, forcing a smile. "Oh, really? That's good. It's lovely that you care about Malcolm's health." But in my heart, I thought, my son has been healthy for 22 years on his mother's cooking. The wedding took place at the country club. I had to buy my dress from a second-hand store because I couldn't afford a new one. Malcolm offered me money, but I refused. I still had my pride. At the wedding, I sat at a corner table where they had seated the groom's side family. Meanwhile, Savannah's family, in Armani suits and Chanel dresses, occupied the center. I watched Malcolm standing under the altar, wearing a tuxedo, looking like a completely different person. He was no longer my little boy. In his speech, Malcolm thanked Savannah's family for welcoming him into their warm family. He thanked Savannah for opening up a new world, but he didn't mention me. Not a single word. I sat there, clutching my handkerchief, smiling it off. But inside, something broke. After the wedding, Malcolm called less often. At first, once a week, then every 2 weeks, then only on major holidays. Every time I called, he always said, "Mom, I'm so busy. I'll call you back later," but that later never came. Then, 6 months ago, Malcolm bought the mansion in River Oaks. 7 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a mini golf course. He sent me a photo with the caption, "Look, Mom, I finally did it." I looked at the photo, feeling both proud and empty, because I knew that in that vast house, there would be no room for me. Not because of the space, but because I no longer belonged to my son's world. And tonight, the first night Savannah invited me to their dinner party, I had prepared meticulously. I bought the nicest dress I could afford, practiced holding European-style silverware, and told myself, for Malcolm, try to fit in. But when I stepped into the living room, saw the unfamiliar faces, and listened to Savannah ramble about imported and exclusive things, I understood that no matter how hard I tried, I would only be the mother from the East End in their eyes. And when I spoke about the Costco wine, I wasn't trying to embarrass Savannah. I was just telling the truth. Because I had taught Malcolm that the truth is more important than appearance. But it seems that lesson was somehow lost between that 2-bedroom house and this 7-bedroom mansion. Now let me tell you about that bottle of wine, the Bordeaux that ignited everything. Savannah stood up, holding the bottle in one hand and waving the other slightly like a queen bestowing a favor. "My dear guests," Her voice was so sweet, it made my ears itch slightly. "This is a 2015 Chateau Margaux from my close friend's family plantation in Bordeaux. They export only a limited quantity each year. I had to take a private flight to France last month to secure this special allocation." The guests nodded in appreciation. A woman in a Valentino dress whispered, "Savannah always has the most exclusive items." Savannah poured the wine into each crystal glass, her movements slow and careful, as if performing a solemn ritual. "You'll notice the notes of blackcurrant, a hint of cedar, and a finish that lasts for 30 seconds. I took a sip. The wine was good, undeniably, but I had drunk fine wine in many places in my life, and I knew for sure that— "Sweetie," I blurted out, without any malice, "I stopped by Speck's Wine on Westheimer last week. They had a big display of French wines on sale. If I remember correctly, this bottle was selling for $89, and they even had an extra 10% off coupon." Silence. A thick silence, so dense that I could hear my own heart beating. Savannah looked at me, her face pale. The wine glass in her hand trembled slightly. You said what?" Savannah's voice was shaky. "Oh, I just wanted to say, Speck's has a lot of good French wine now. They import directly, so the price—" "Mom!" Malcolm jumped up, his face flushed. "Can you step out for a minute?" The guests glanced at each other. A gray-haired gentleman cleared his throat. The woman next to me muttered, "Well, that's awkward." I looked at Savannah. Tears were already welling up. Not tears of hurt, but the kind of tears from someone whose mask has slipped. "I made it clear," Savannah choked out but tried to maintain her composure. "This is a special allocation. Not regular store stock." "But I didn't say it was bad. The wine at Speck's is authentic. They have all the paperwork. I even talked to the wine specialist there about—" "Denise!" Malcolm shouted. He grabbed my arm. "Outside! Right now!" He pulled me across the breathlessly silent room. I briefly saw a few guests, secretly pulling out their phones, perhaps to check if Speck's really sold Chateau Margaux. Malcolm shoved me into his study and slammed the door shut. The room was luxurious with walnut bookshelves, a leather desk, and the scent of expensive lavender. Everything was perfect, and everything felt so fake. "What are you doing?" Malcolm turned back, hands on his hips. "Do you know what you just did?" "Son, you just humiliated Savannah in front of 30 people." Malcolm's voice trembled. "She spent all week preparing this party. She wanted to make a good impression on my business partners. And you ruined everything." I looked at my son, truly looked at him. The Tom Ford suit, the Johnston and Murphy leather shoes, his hair slicked back with gel, a glittering Rolex on his wrist, all creating a perfect image. But his eyes, the eyes that once held such sincerity, now only contained anxiety about impressions and partners. "Son," I said, trying to keep my voice gentle, "I didn't intend to embarrass Savannah. I just told the truth. If that bottle was from a family plantation, as she claimed, why was it at Speck's? And if she really took a private flight to France, why wouldn't she know the store was selling it?" "That's not the point," Malcolm nearly yelled. "The point is, you behaved like someone who doesn't know how to act in this society." That sentence stabbed my heart like a cold knife. "Doesn't know how to act?" I repeated each word. "You mean I'm not sophisticated enough to sit at your dinner table?" "That's not it." Malcolm rubbed his face, his voice softening slightly. "You know that you and Savannah are different. You grew up in different circumstances. But here, in River Oaks, there are certain rules, and one of them is never to embarrass the host." I stood there, silently looking at my son, and realized I didn't recognize him anymore. "Malcolm," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "do you remember when you were 8 and the kids at school bullied you because of your old shirt? You came home crying. And what did I tell you?" He was silent, looking down at the floor. "I said, my son, never be ashamed because we are poor. We are poor in money, but rich in love and truthfulness." Those kids have nice clothes, but they don't have what you have, a good heart and honesty." Malcolm swallowed hard, still not looking at me. "I taught you that the truth is more important than appearance. I taught you never to pretend to be someone you are not, and now you're telling me that all of that is no longer true? You don't understand." Malcolm shook his head. "This world is different. To succeed, you have to adapt. I let out a laugh, but it was a painful sound. "Or is it deception, son?" "You must apologize to Savannah." Malcolm flared up, his face crimson. "Go outside." "Apologize to my wife, right now, or what?" The air in the room thickened. Malcolm looked at me, his jaw clenched. "Otherwise," he said, each word cold as ice, "you get out of this house. And don't come back." In that moment, I understood that this was no longer just about a bottle of wine. This was the defining moment of the entire relationship between a mother and son. And I, Denise Holloway, had to choose: remain silent to keep my son, or speak the truth to keep my self-integrity. Have you ever felt like time stood still? The whole world shifted into slow motion, and every tiny detail around you suddenly became painfully clear? I stood there in my son's luxurious office, hearing that sentence echo, "Get out of this house, and don't come back." I looked into Malcolm's eyes and saw a stranger, but for just a moment, I also saw the 8-year-old boy, the child who used to hug me tight when he was scared of a thunderstorm, the high school student who cried on my shoulder after being cut from the soccer team, the 22-year-old man who once said, "Mom, you are my hero." In that very moment, a part of me wanted to kneel down, wanted to say, "My son, I'm sorry. I will do anything not to lose you," because that is the greatest fear of every mother, isn't it? The fear of losing your child, the fear that the child you carried, labored for, raised, and loved with everything you had will one day turn away and say, "I don't need you anymore." I thought about the sleepless nights by Malcolm's bedside when he had a high fever, my hand checking his forehead every 10 minutes to measure his temperature, the prayers I whispered, "Please God, don't take my only child." I remembered the day Malcolm walked onto the stage to receive his degree from Rice University. I sat among parents in expensive suits, wearing a dress I had bought 5 years prior. And I was the one who cried the most, crying from pride because all the difficult days had finally borne fruit. I remembered the morning Malcolm moved into this mansion. He called, his voice excited like a child's. "Mom, I did it! I have a big house now. Are you proud of me?" And I said, "I am always proud of you, Malcolm. Always." Yet now, standing in this room, facing the judgmental eyes of my own son, I wondered, was everything I did, everything I sacrificed, was it all leading to this moment, being chased out of my own son's house? A voice in my head whispered, "Just apologize, Denise. Just bow your head. Apologize to Savannah and everything will calm down. Your son will forgive you. At least you will still be in his life." But another voice, the voice of the woman who used to work 2 shifts every day, who used to patch her son's backpack with hands trembling from exhaustion, who taught him about honor and integrity, replied, "If your child doesn't respect you, then it means you taught him wrong, and if to keep your child, you have to abandon all the values you taught, then what exactly are you keeping?" I suddenly remembered a rainy afternoon 15 years ago. Malcolm was 10 then, his face swollen from a fight. "What did you do?" I checked his wounds in a panic. "I hit Brian, Mom," Malcolm cried. "I know you told me not to fight, but what? Brian lied to the teacher." He blamed Danny for stealing a pen, but I saw him drop the pen in the schoolyard. I told him to tell the truth, but he wouldn't, and Danny was unfairly punished. I couldn't stand it, Mom, so I hit him. What did I say to Malcolm? Ah, yes. I hugged him, then said, "Son, I don't support fighting. But I understand why you did it. Sometimes standing up for the truth means confronting the stronger person. Remember, the truth is always worth fighting for, no matter how hard, no matter how much it hurts you." Malcolm nodded, wiping his tears. "I understand, Mom. Next time I'll choose a different way. But I will never stay silent in the face of lies." Yet now, Malcolm himself stood before his mother, demanding that she stay silent in the face of lies, demanding that she apologize for speaking the truth. I looked around the room. The bookshelves were lined with leather-bound volumes, all pristine, as if never read, only for decoration. The walls displayed awards, all about business achievements, excellent networking. Not a single picture of us. Not a single memory of the small house in the East End. No trace of the past. It was as if Malcolm was trying to erase everything about where he came from, about the person he used to be. "You know," I said, my voice suddenly strangely calm, "there's something I've never told you." Malcolm frowned. "What are you talking about?" "When you were 12, the hospital offered me a managerial position, double the salary, but it required fixed night shifts from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., meaning I wouldn't be home with you in the evening." I paused, swallowing hard. I refused. Not because I didn't need the money. God, I needed the money more than anything back then. But because I didn't want you to come home after school and not see me. I didn't want you to grow up in an empty house. I wanted you to know there was always someone there for you. Always. Malcolm parted his lips, but said nothing. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty," I continued. "I'm telling you so you understand. Every decision in my life was for you. I missed out on many things, chances for promotion, perhaps even a new marriage, just so you could have a decent childhood, so you would know you were loved unconditionally." I stepped closer, looking straight into Malcolm's eyes. "And now, what are you asking me to apologize for?" "Because I spoke the truth, the very thing I taught you to value." "But you don't understand," Malcolm began. "No, son. You are the one who doesn't understand." My voice was soft but firm. "If I kneel down today, I'm not just betraying myself. I'm betraying everything I taught you. It's like saying, all my words about honesty, about honor, they were lies. Because when the pressure is on, I too choose appearance over the truth." Tears welled up, and I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall. "So, my son, I will not apologize the way you want. I will not kneel before Savannah to say I was wrong for speaking the truth." I took a deep breath. "But I will go out there, and I will tell Savannah and everyone what they need to hear." In my own way, Malcolm was confused and worried. "What are you going to do?" I smiled, a sad but resolute smile. "I am going to give you one final lesson, Malcolm." "The lesson you seem to have forgotten." I turned and walked toward the door. "Mom," Malcolm called out, "don't do anything reckless." I paused, glancing back. Reckless, son, is living a lie. What I am about to do, that is called courage. Then I opened the door and stepped out. Right behind that door was the entire living room and the fate of my family. I will apologize, but in my own way. What do you think will be said in front of all the guests? I walked out into the hallway, each step feeling like I was treading on shattered glass. My heart was pounding, but strangely, the fear had vanished. A peculiar sense of peace spread through me, the kind of peace that only comes when you have decided to stand firm on your principles, regardless of the consequences. The sound of forced laughter drifted from the living room. I heard Savannah's voice, which had regained its composure, rambling about this summer's yacht trip to Santorini. The guests were trying to act as if nothing had happened, but the tension was palpable, even from here. I stopped at the large doorway leading into the living room, looking at the room one last time. The chandelier glittered, designer suits and dresses, crystal glasses, everything perfect, everything hollow. And then, like a flash from the past, I remembered a Sunday afternoon 20 years ago. Malcolm, 4 years old, sitting on my lap in our small kitchen. He pointed at the Christmas card I had just finished writing. "Mom, your handwriting is so beautiful." His eyes were sparkling. "Thank you, darling," I smiled, kissing his head. "I'm writing a card for Mrs. Betty, our neighbor." "Why do you have to write to her?" "She doesn't like us. I heard her tell Mrs. Johnson that we are poor." I paused my hand, looking at his innocent face. "It's true that Mrs. Betty said that. But I'm still sending the card, because I want you to know one thing. We do not let other people define who we are. We are poor in money, but rich in love. And that, my son, is priceless." Malcolm hugged me tight. "I love you. You're the best person in the world." I took a deep breath. It was time. I walked into the living room. This time, no one spoke. Everyone turned to look at me, anticipating the upcoming drama. Savannah sat on the beige leather sofa, flanked by 2 close friends, each holding a handkerchief ready to comfort the victim. Malcolm followed me, his face white. He stood huddled in a corner, hands in his pockets, like a child waiting to see his parents argue. I walked past the curious glances and whispers, stopping directly in front of Savannah. She looked up, her eyes red. I wasn't sure if they were real tears or part of the performance. "Savannah," I said, my voice clear and calm, and the whole room leaned in toward me. "You want me to apologize." "And I will do that." Savannah let out a breath of relief. A small smile flickered across her lips. The friend beside her subtly patted her shoulder, as if to say, "See, she realized her mistake." "I apologize, Savannah," I continued, looking directly into her eyes. "I apologize that you felt the need to pretend." The room suddenly fell silent, the kind of silence where you could hear the tick of a clock. "I apologize that you thought a person's worth is measured by what they own, the brands they wear, the stories you fabricated about private flights and a family plantation." What are you saying?" Savannah stammered, her face turning from white to crimson. "I apologize that you deceived my son, a good, sincere young man, into thinking you are someone you are not." I turned to the guests, faces gaping in shock. "And I also apologize to all of you. I apologize that you had to sit here, pretending to be impressed by things that aren't real, pretending that a bottle of wine worth $89 from Specs Wine is a special allocation from France. Pretending that Savannah's Hermès bag is not a knockoff purchased from a Chinese website." "Stop it!" Savannah jumped up, practically screaming. "You have no right." "I have the right to speak the truth, Savannah." My voice remained calm but firm, especially when that truth affects my son. I looked toward Malcolm. He stood frozen like a statue. "Son, I apologize to you. I apologize for letting you live in this bubble of pretense for too long. I apologize for not speaking up sooner when I saw you were losing yourself." My tears fell, not from fear or pain, but from liberation. "You know, Malcolm, looking at you amidst all this luxury, I don't see success. I see a scared man. Scared that if he sheds the facade, people will see the East End boy, the child I once taught that honesty is more important than appearance." "Nonsense," a friend of Savannah's spoke up, the one in the Chanel dress I had noticed earlier. "You can't just come here and insult your hosts like that." I turned to her, offering a sad smile. "I am not insulting anyone. I am merely doing what should have been done long ago, telling the truth." I looked back at Savannah, who was trembling, mascara smudged on her cheeks. "But there is one last thing I want to apologize for, Savannah. I apologize for thinking you were the villain in this story." She looked up, confused. "The truth is, you are also a victim of a society that taught you that only when you have enough money, enough status, enough luxury, are you valuable. You grew up believing that love and respect could be bought with labels." A tear glistened in Savannah's eye. This time, I believe it was real. But do you know what? It's not. Real love, real family, real happiness, they are priceless. They don't come from an expensive bottle of wine or a private jet. They come from moments of sincerity. When you sit with the person you love without needing to pretend, without needing to prove anything. I looked around the room. Some avoided my gaze. Others looked down at their wine glasses. But there were also a few very slight nods, as if I had just voiced what they had always thought, but dared not speak. You know, I said, my voice resonating evenly, I worked 2 shifts every day for 15 years to raise my son. I don't have designer dresses. I don't have expensive bags. Many nights, I ate instant noodles to save money for Malcolm's books. I paused, letting the words sink in. But I have one thing. A son who knew his mother loved him unconditionally. Evenings spent at the kitchen table doing homework, where we laughed about the day, memories that money cannot buy. My voice slightly trembled, but I didn't stop. And do you know the most painful thing? It's not being chased out of my son's house. It's realizing that somewhere, on his path chasing after success, my son forgot the most important lessons I taught him. I looked straight at Malcolm. Tears were streaming down his face, yet he stood still like a statue. Son, I'm not angry. I'm just sad. Sad that you let the pressure of this world, this River Oaks world, the lavish parties, the fake friends, make you forget who you are. I stepped closer, standing right in front of him. Do you remember when you were 16 you cried because your friends made fun of me for being a nurse? You said you were embarrassed that I wasn't a doctor or a lawyer? Malcolm nodded weakly, tears overflowing. And what did I say? I said, I am proud of my work. I save lives. If you are ashamed of that, then I have failed to teach you about true value. I reached out and gently touched Malcolm's cheek. He did not pull away. That day, you hugged me and said, I'm sorry, Mom. I'm not ashamed of you. I'm ashamed of myself for letting others make me think that way. You even promised never to let anyone define your worth by appearances. My voice choked up. But today, you broke that promise. Didn't you? Malcolm burst into heartbreaking sobs. Mom, I know, and that's why I have to do this. Not to hurt you, but to wake you up. I turned back to Savannah. She had collapsed onto the sofa, her face buried in her hands. Savannah, I don't hate you. I'm just sad for you. Sad that you've lived in fear for too long. Fear that if people knew who you really are, they wouldn't accept you. But people who truly love you won't care where you come from or how much you have. They love your heart and who you are as a person. I looked around the room one last time. Anyone who only loves the shell you put on, that is not love. That is a transaction. I stepped back, preparing to leave. Before crossing the threshold, I spoke my final sentence, intended for everyone, but most of all for Malcolm. You can have everything, money, mansions, expensive wine, but if you don't have honesty, if you don't have self-respect, if you don't have people who love you for who you truly are, then ultimately, you have nothing at all. And that is the real tragedy. I smiled, a sad but serene smile. I raised my son to be a good man. I hope one day he will remember that I turned my back and walked out of the room in absolute silence. No one stopped me. No one said a word. Only the sound of my high heels echoed on the marble floor as I left the River Oaks mansion, and perhaps left my son's life. But I walked away with my head held high, because for the first time in years, I felt free. The door closed behind me, but the story was not over. On the other side, every mask had just cracked, and the fallout from a night of apology would roll in like a tsunami. Would Malcolm run after me, or stand still amidst the wreckage? The mansion door closed behind me with a very soft thud, but in my ears, it sounded like thunder. I stood on the granite steps, looking out at Kirby Drive, shimmering with lights. The surrounding mansions blazed with light, each a fortress of fake perfection. I took a deep breath. The November air in Houston was cool and crisp, mixed with the scent of magnolia from the neighboring garden. My hands trembled slightly as I called an Uber. The best dress, bought at Macy's on sale, suddenly felt well-fitted and more comfortable. It was as if I had just shed a heavy armor that I hadn't even realized I had been wearing for too long. While waiting for the car, my phone vibrated. A message from Linda, my former colleague at the hospital, now my best friend. "Denise, I saw your missed call. Are you okay? How was the dinner party?" I gave a faint, sad smile and typed, "I'll tell you later." I'm on my way home. This is probably the last time I'll ever be invited to my son's house. The Uber arrived, an older model Camry, clean, practical. The driver was a friendly Vietnamese young man who smiled. "Good evening, ma'am." "Headed to the East End?" "Yes, that's right." I nodded, getting into the back seat. As the car rolled away, I looked back at the mansion one last time. The lights were still bright, but from here it was distant and cold, like a fairy tale castle. Beautiful on the outside, empty on the inside. Arriving home around 10 o'clock, I took off my shoes and sank onto the old sofa I had bought 15 years ago. The cushion was sunken, the fabric faded, but it embraced me like an old friend. I looked around. Malcolm's photos hung on the wall. From his childhood days to his college graduation, the wooden kitchen table of our mother and son meals. A small kitchen, yet full of memories. This is home. Not the stark white walls and soaring ceilings of River Oaks. My phone vibrated again. My heart skipped a beat. "Malcolm?" "Number." It was Linda. "Pick up! You have to tell me what happened." I answered the call and spent 30 minutes recounting everything, from the Costco wine, Malcolm's threat, to my apology in front of everyone. When I finished, there was a silence. Then Linda burst out laughing, a hearty, excited laugh. "Denise, you are a legend. I have to tell the group chat at the hospital." "Linda, don't—" "No, listen to me. You just did what so many people want to do, but don't dare. Speak the truth in front of fakes. You said what everyone knew, but no one dared to say." Linda's voice softened, becoming sincere. "More importantly, you showed Malcolm. Loving your child doesn't mean becoming a slave to their deception. That's the lesson he needed." Hanging up, I lay down and stared at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. Malcolm's face kept appearing, shocked, angry, and then something else. Could it be realization? The next morning, I woke up to 47 messages. My heart sank. Had Malcolm messaged to cut ties? But no. None of the texts were from Malcolm. The first was from an unknown number. "Ms. Denise, I'm Jessica, Savannah's friend. I apologize for bothering you. I got your number from Malcolm. I just wanted to say, what you said last night touched me. I'm also living a lie, and I am so tired of it." The second was from Patricia, also a guest last night. "Ms. Denise, you don't know how much you inspired me. I am 52, and I've spent my whole life trying to fit into the River Oaks world. Last night, I realized for the first time how many years I've wasted." Then the third, the fourth. The story spread like wildfire in the River Oaks community after I left. Some called me rude, uncultured, but many people, especially women who had lived too long under upper-class pressure, said they felt liberated by what I had said. One message made me pause. "Ms. Denise, I am Thomas Pierce, Savannah's father. I need to meet you. There are things you should know about my daughter. Please call me back." I put the phone down. If a wealthy father in River Oaks proactively wanted to meet, not to demand his honor back, but to explain, then something very big must have cracked after that night. And this crack would bring everything down. 2 days of silence followed. No calls, No texts from Malcolm. I tried to remain calm, immersing myself in volunteer work at the community center, but my heart felt like it was bleeding with every beat. On Wednesday afternoon, I received a call, not from Malcolm, but from Clara, Malcolm's cousin in Dallas, who still kept in touch with me. "Aunt Denise," Clara's voice was hurried, "do you know about Malcolm?" "I don't. He hasn't called me. He just called me. He was crying, Auntie." "I've never heard Malcolm cry like that. He said he made a big mistake. He just found out a lot of things about Savannah." My heart pounded. What things? I don't know the details. I only heard him talking about money and debt. And he kept repeating, "Mom was right. Mom was always right." On Wednesday afternoon, a black Mercedes stopped outside the house. I was watering the plants. A gray-haired man stepped out, elegantly dressed, but not ostentatious. I recognized him immediately, Thomas Pierce, Savannah's father. "Ms. Denise Holloway?" His voice was deep, sounding tired. "Yes, that's me." "May I speak with you for a moment?" "About my daughter." We sat in the small kitchen. I brewed regular Folgers coffee. Not organic, not expensive. Thomas took a sip, sighed. "Ms. Denise, I owe you an apology." And an explanation. I remained silent, waiting. "Savannah is my daughter. I love her. But I also know she has issues. Things my wife, who passed away 5 years ago, was always worried about." He looked into the distance. "Savannah grew up in luxury, not because we wanted to spoil her, but because I didn't know how to raise a teenage girl after her mother died of cancer. I used money and gifts to compensate for the absence. I thought if she had everything, she wouldn't remember the emptiness." His voice choked. "I was wrong. I created a girl who measures her value by possessions, a girl who is afraid that if people see the real person, a lonely, grieving, insecure child, they will abandon her, just like her mother abandoned her." I spoke softly. "But her mother didn't choose to leave." "I know. But to a child, death feels like abandonment, and Savannah never learned to overcome that pain." Thomas took a pile of papers from his briefcase and placed them on the table. "This is what I found out after the party. Savannah owes over $200,000 in credit card debt. She has been shopping uncontrollably to maintain a lifestyle that even I don't live." He pushed another stack of papers forward. "And worst of all, Savannah withdrew money from the joint account with Malcolm without informing him. $75,000 in total. Malcolm just found out yesterday. It felt like a punch to my gut." "Malcolm knows already?" "He does, and he is devastated. He feels betrayed. More importantly, he feels guilty for how he treated you." Thomas looked at me, his eyes full of remorse. "What you said that night, about honesty, about true value, was exactly what my daughter needed to hear, but no one dared to say it, including me. What will you do now?" "I will pay off her debt, for the last time. But with conditions. She must undergo psychological therapy, learn to face problems instead of masking them with handbags and high heels." He stood up, extending his hand. "Thank you, Miss Denise. You did what a real mother does. Speak the truth, no matter how painful, even if it means potentially losing your own child." After Thomas left, I sat motionless by the cold coffee cup. A strange sympathy welled up for Savannah, a girl who lost her mother and tried to fill the void with things that could never fill it. Perhaps we are more alike than I thought. Everyone is looking to be loved and accepted. It's only the way we search that differs. That night, at 11 p.m., there was a knock on the door. I knew who it was before I opened it. Malcolm stood there, eyes red, hair messy, still in his suit but with a loose tie. He looked like he had just been through a storm. "Mom," his voice choked. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. Malcolm walked in. For the first time in years, he looked at this small house no longer with a look of awkwardness or shame, but with longing. "You were right. he said, his voice trembling. "You were right about everything." And Malcolm, my 32-year-old son, the successful man from River Oaks, knelt down in the small kitchen, embraced his mother, and cried like a child. I hugged Malcolm, letting him cry on my shoulder like he did when he was little, when he was bullied by friends, when he failed his first math test, when his pet dog passed away. I stroked his hair, not saying a word, just allowing all the long-held anguish to pour out. When he finally quieted, Malcolm sat down on the old chair he used to sit on to do his homework, wiping his face with the back of his hand. I made him a cup of hot tea. I didn't press for answers. I just waited for him to be ready. "Mom," Malcolm's voice was hoarse, "I don't know where to start. I was so blind." I sat across from him, holding his hand. "Son, I'm listening." Malcolm took a deep breath. "After you left, the party fell apart." Half the guests left immediately. The rest clustered in small groups whispering. Savannah ran straight upstairs and locked the bedroom door. And I stood in the middle of that empty living room, looking at the special bottle of wine on the table, and suddenly understood. "You were right." He paused, looking into his teacup. "I didn't believe you. I thought you were jealous, that you didn't want me to be happy in my new life. But the only person who loved me enough to tell me the truth was you." "How did you find out?" I asked gently. Malcolm offered a sad smile. "I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about what you said, about the wine bottle, about the fake life. I started checking. I searched for Chateau Margaux 2015, and just as you said, Specs Wine sold it for $89. No special allocation, just an ordinary wine that had been hyped up. Then I thought, if she lied about the wine, what else?" Malcolm looked down at his phone. "I checked the Hermes bag she always showed off. I work in finance. I know how to spot a genuine product. And that bag was fake. A sophisticated fake, but still a fake." He put the phone down, his voice shaking. My world just collapsed. I woke Savannah up at 2 a.m. to demand an explanation. She denied it, said I was crazy. It wasn't until I showed her the browsing history, those knockoff websites, that she finally admitted it. "And then?" I prompted. "And then it all came flooding out." Malcolm shook his head. "She admitted most of her designer items were fake." "The private flight to France? Non-existent. The photos were taken from someone else's Instagram. The family plantation in Bordeaux? Made up. Le Cordon Bleu in Paris? Also no. Just a 3-week cooking course in Houston." A pang of sorrow constricted my heart. I felt terrible for my son. "How did that make you feel?" "I felt like a fool, Mom." Malcolm bowed his head. "I loved a shadow, an image she created. I didn't know the real Savannah. And worse." He paused, struggling to speak. "Worse what, son?" "Worse is that I kicked you, the person who sacrificed her life for me, the only person who was honest with me, out of the house for a lying woman. I chose a fake life over my own mother. I'm a terrible son, Mom." Tears welled up again. I stood up, gently lifting his chin. "Look at me, Malcolm." His red eyes looked up, full of remorse. "You are not a bad son. You are a man who lost his way," I said clearly. "And do you know why you lost your way?" Malcolm shook his head. "Because you were afraid. You were afraid that the East End boy would never be good enough for River Oaks. You were afraid people would only see the poor kid who got lucky with a scholarship. So you tried to become someone else, tried to erase your past, even erase your mother, because you thought that was the only way to be accepted." I sat down next to him. "But they should respect you, not for who you pretend to be, but for how far you've come. Your story, growing up with a single mother, full scholarship, building your own career, that's something to be proud of, not something to be ashamed of." Malcolm nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I know now," But when I met Savannah, she was everything I thought I wanted. Sophisticated, elite, recognized by the important people. I thought if she loved me, it meant I had made it. You didn't need to make it anymore, I smiled. You were already a good man before you met her. We were quiet for a moment. Only the ticking clock could be heard. Then Malcolm asked, his voice childlike, "Do you hate me?" "Hate you?" I wiped his tears. "I can be angry, I can be disappointed, but no mother hates her child. That's not in the nature of motherhood, but I treated you badly." "And you learned your lesson," I interrupted. "The important thing is not never to make a mistake, but what you learn after you do." Malcolm hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for hurting you, for kicking you out of the house, for putting a strange woman above the person who gave birth to me. I forgive you. I always forgive you," I whispered. The night stretched until nearly 3 in the morning. Malcolm talked about the pressure at his job, rich colleagues, meetings at exclusive clubs where he always felt out of place, about Savannah constantly comparing him to her friends' husbands, the heirs, with veiled comments. Brad bought Jennifer a Porsche. Michael took Sarah to the Maldives for 2 weeks, making him feel like he was never good enough. "And you rushed to prove yourself," I finished his thought. "Yes." Malcolm nodded. "I worked day and night. Bought a house beyond my means, spent lavishly on parties, so Savannah had something to show off. Every time I wanted to slow down, to live simply, Savannah would say, 'I don't want to live like poor people, honey.' I bit my lip, angry on his behalf. "And you didn't tell me?" Malcolm bowed his head. "I was ashamed. You taught me to live within my means. I was afraid you would be disappointed if I told you, so I cut off contact. I thought if you didn't see it, you wouldn't judge me." "I don't judge you, Malcolm. I worry about you. They are different things." The sky outside the window faded to gray. Malcolm looked at the kitchen window, where he had eaten thousands of breakfasts when he was in school. "Mom, can I sleep here tonight? I don't want to go back to that house." "Your bed is still there," I smiled. "I never touched your room." Malcolm walked into his old bedroom. I heard him sob softly. When I peeked in, he was standing looking at the basketball posters, the old bookshelf, the bed with the blue blanket, everything exactly as it was the day he left. "You kept everything." Malcolm choked up. "Of course." I stood next to him. "This is your home. It's always been your home. No matter how big your mansion in River Oaks is, this room is waiting for you to come back." Malcolm hugged me. "I miss home, Mom. I miss home so much." In the morning, I woke up at 7 out of habit. Malcolm was still asleep, curled up under the blanket that was now a little short for his adult frame. I made breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, bacon, his favorite dish. The aroma woke him. Malcolm came out, hair messy, eyes swollen, but his face much calmer than it had been for years. "Mom cooked a special breakfast." "Yes." I put the plate down. "I think you needed it." We ate in peace. No important people, no guests to impress. Just mother and son, a simple breakfast in the small kitchen. "Mom," Malcolm put down his fork. "What should I do now?" "With Savannah, I sighed softly. "Do you love her?" Malcolm thought for a long time. "I don't know. I think I loved the idea of her. Beautiful, sophisticated, from the elite circle, the real person. I'm not sure I know her, and I'm not sure she knows who I am either." "Then you have your answer," I said gently. "Marriage cannot stand on lies. It needs truth, respect, and real love, not love for an image." Malcolm nodded slowly. "Savannah's father called me. He said he would help her pay off all the debt, but she has to go to therapy, and he advised me to think carefully about this marriage. Even her own father sees it." Malcolm smiled sadly. He said, "You deserve someone who loves you for who you are, not for what you can buy." Sound familiar, Mom? I smiled. A decent person always recognizes the truth when they see it. Malcolm was silent for a few beats. I think I need time. Time to find myself again, to remember who I was before I got caught up in all of this. That's a wise decision. I squeezed his hand. I'm here, whenever you need me. Mom, Malcolm looked at me, his eyes lighting up for the first time in days. Do you remember you once told me that no matter where I went or who I became, I would always be your boy? I remember, I smiled, teary-eyed. I'm sorry I forgot. Now I remember, and I promise I will never forget again. We hugged in the small kitchen. The early Houston sun streamed through the window. For the first time in years, I felt my family had returned. Not in the luxurious mansion, but here, in the small house where real love resided. Malcolm has returned, but the marriage is uncertain. Will he choose therapy and dialogue or separation to save himself? And Savannah, if she has to face the truth, will she collapse or grow? The next part will answer. 3 weeks after the fateful dinner party, I was sitting on my old sofa when the phone rang. An unfamiliar number. Miss Denise? A soft, trembling female voice. It's Savannah. I paused for a few seconds. Go ahead. I wanted to see you, face to face. There are things I need to say in person. An hour later, Savannah Pierce was sitting in my small kitchen. No heavy makeup, no designer dress, t-shirt, jeans, hair tied up neatly. Tired, but real. Thank you for letting me come, she said, her hand shaking as she held the teacup. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for treating you that way, for building a fake life and dragging Malcolm into it. She wiped a tear. After that night, I collapsed. Dad took me to see a doctor. I was diagnosed with anxiety disorder and depression. I had been trying to use shopping and pretending to cover it up. Are you getting treatment? I asked, my voice softer than I expected. Yes, 2 sessions a week. Savannah looked down. I'm learning to look straight at myself. Why I had to pretend, because of the pain of my mother's death, that I never processed. The doctor said I used objects as armor. If I overwhelmed people with handbags and extravagant stories, they wouldn't look deeply at the real me. The thing I feared most was, if anyone saw the real me, they would leave me, just like my mother left. Your mother didn't leave you, I said gently. She passed away. I know that logically, Savannah nodded. But the heart of a 13-year-old child felt abandoned. My dad was too grieved and didn't know how to connect, so he used money to compensate. I mistakenly learned that love came with gifts. The kitchen was silent for a moment. I thought about Malcolm and all the years I tried to let him know he was loved for who he was. Savannah looked up. What you said that night, that real love cannot be bought, hit me like a blow. But it was the blow I needed. For the first time, someone loved Malcolm enough to tell the truth, even if it meant potentially losing her own son. She looked straight at me. You taught me that real love is always accompanied by honesty. Caring means not letting the person you love self-destruct. I felt a lump in my throat. What are you going to do now? Malcolm and I have talked many times. We are temporarily separating, not divorcing yet, so each of us can find ourselves again. Malcolm needs to remember who he is before being swept up in the race for status. And I need to learn to love myself without designer labels or external validation. Good, I nodded. That is a mature choice. My dad paid off all my debt, but this is the last time. I'm moving back into a small apartment, finding a real job, and living within my means. She offered a sad smile. For the first time, I will live according to reality. It's scary, but I feel lighter. Savannah took a deep breath. I don't expect your forgiveness immediately. I know I hurt you and tried to separate you from Malcolm, but I am trying to change. I want to return to the person I was before pain and fear turned me into a false version. I looked at the girl in front of me, no longer the arrogant daughter-in-law, but a person grappling with old wounds. I remembered telling Malcolm, "We are all looking for a way to be loved and accepted." "Savannah," I said softly, "I don't promise everything will be fine right away, nor do I promise we will become close. But I respect that you dared to come here, dared to look in the mirror and call what you saw by its right name. Many people go their whole lives without doing that." Savannah burst into tears. "Thank you for not rejecting me, for still seeing the good in me when I couldn't even see it." I stood up and hugged her, for the first time, not out of politeness, but out of genuine compassion. "You are young. You have a lifetime to correct mistakes and grow. Don't waste time on regret. Use it to build your future." Savannah left. I sat back down in the kitchen, my heart light but thoughtful. My phone vibrated, a message from Malcolm. "Mom, Savannah told me she met you." "Thank you for giving her a chance. You didn't have to, but you did. That's why you're always the most amazing woman I know." I texted back, "Because that's how real love works. It doesn't give up on people, even when they make mistakes. It offers a second chance." A minute later, "I am learning that from you." Once again, I looked out the window. The Houston sunset painted the sky in orange and pink hues. I thought about the journey, the party, my apology, the tears, then the reconciliation. Perhaps life teaches us this way. Sometimes, loving someone means saying the difficult truth, standing by what is right, even when it hurts. And it is precisely those harsh moments that bring the most valuable lessons. Malcolm has found his way back home, not to the River Oaks mansion, but to himself. Savannah has begun a long journey, but the important thing is that she has started. And I realized, the best thing a mother can do is not to make her child comfortable, but to make her child awake. And that, I believe, is the final lesson life sent me. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever had to speak a difficult truth to save a loved one from a life of pretense, please leave a comment and share your experience. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories about family, truth, and healing. Every week we will meet again to share more journeys of returning to our true selves.